Oh, hey everyone. Yes. Yeah, so today my talk is called He's Just Not Filtering You, Fixing Relationships with DAX. Yeah, just talk about, some fun and interesting and hopefully useful ways you can expand upon an existing data model with DAX. I work as an analytics consultant for Iteration Insights. Been there for about a little over 2 years now, I think. Yeah. Before that, highest achievement was a Ph.D. in computational chemistry from the University of British Columbia. It's a lot of computer simulations, that sort of thing. We're here. Okay, so on with the talk, I guess. So in the back end of Power BI, you make your data model here. I'm just showing one on the screen that's sort of part of the AdventureWorks database. But, this is, your typical star schema. You got a fact table in the middle with all your numerical data. You have dimensions around it with various categorical data. And, that's the basis of most things. Sometimes though, you make a nice star schema and it works for a lot of stuff, but maybe it doesn't work for a certain part of your report, or you're using somebody else's data set or like a SSAS or something like that. And, the model isn't going to work for, some part of the report you need to make. So, you want to maybe sometimes expand upon that without necessarily going in and actually doing anything to that data model. Most people in their Power BI reports are just usually using one table, which is really, holding you back from what Power BI is capable of. It's designed to work with a whole bunch of different tables in a star schema format. And, when you create a report, first thing you want to do, at least what I usually do, is I just sit down and think, okay, what am I trying to accomplish in this report? And then I start, figuring out the data model and, designing that. And then if I've done a good job of that, the whole thing is quite easy and quick to do if you do that beginning work. And on the screen here is just kind of a sample toy data set that I'm going to be using for this presentation. I gave this talk, I think, in October, a little over a month ago, at the Dynamic Communities North America Summit, which was supposed to be done in Nashville, but was moved online for reasons. And so I decided, make a little data set of my various expenses I was thinking I may incur at the conference had I gone. It's mostly food. So I have, in my fact table here, is basically all my expenses, different restaurants I go to with their restaurant dimension, the date ID, so the date I went on, and that goes to a date table, and the price of each of my meals. And simple enough star schema. And if I want to make a visual with that, it's quite straightforward. You can just put a stack column chart visual in Power BI and just build and put the price in as the values, and then I use my restaurants as labels, date as the axis, and no DAX or anything, and I've made a nice little interesting visual here. This is how it should work for a star schema. You got your numbers in the middle here, and then your dimension stuff forming your axes, and labels, legends, things like that. And simple enough. But, let's, start getting a little bit in, start making things a little bit more complicated, and, seeing what else we can do and start using some DAX. So, the first thing when you're making a data model is generally, most of the time you'll only have one relationship between a dimension and your fact tables. Just going straight one way. They also have a direction, the dimension filters the fact. But it is possible in Power BI to create multiple relationships between the tables. And here I've added another column to my fact table for my reimbursed date ID. You know, this was supposed to be a business trip, but I was hoping to get reimbursed. And I've colored this relationship red because in Power BI, if you have multiple relationships between tables, only one of those relationships is going to be active. Any additional relationships you make are inactive, so that's what the red is indicating here. So, you know, still using this model, if I had, you know, tried to make this visual again, it would work exactly as intended. It wouldn't, despite, you know, I wouldn't get a visual based on the reimbursed date ID. However, if I wanted to use the reimbursed date ID, I can use that relationship and get access to it with DAX using the use relationship function. So yeah, so just on the left here, this would be a simple DAX measure that, you know, would have made the previous visual I made, just summing up the price. But if I want to use the reimbursed date ID, I use this measure here on the right. So reimbursements, I start off with the calculate function, the mother of all functions, as some call it. For the expression, again, just summing up the price. And then for one of the filters, I put the use relationship function in there, and use relationship takes two arguments, which are basically just the columns of an existing inactive relationship in your model. And if you use, you put those in there, use this measure. Now, if you look at the model here, you can see the colors have swapped. So now my active relationship is the one going to the reimbursed date ID column. And, you know, if I were to just basically recreate the previous visual I did before, but now with using the reimbursements measure, I'm now using the reimbursed date ID, and you can see so the dates have shifted. The conference was originally first week of August, so this is, or October, this is second week or third week. And, but, you know, it's all there. Otherwise, and now the prices are adding up based on this reimbursed date ID column. And that, yeah, so that's, you know, one way. You know, a common, like a common example here would be things like order date and shipping date for like a online store or something like that. Yeah. So another potential one, it's the CrossFilter function. So again, the relationships are, they have directions, like, so the filters, you know, the filter should be flowing from the dimension table to the fact table. In Power BI, you do have the option to make a relationship bidirectional, so the filter goes both ways, and that's what I'm trying to show here. Couldn't find a good bidirectional arrow in PowerPoint. Generally, though, in Power BI, you want to avoid a bidirectional relationship as much as possible. If you come to a point where you think it's the only way to do it, you should take a good long think about that, because you're probably doing something wrong. Not to say that, like, there are a few cases you can maybe use it, but generally try to avoid the bidirectional relationship. Although if you think there's a place where you have to use it, you should try to do it in a function or in a measure using the CrossFilter function, which I explain here. So, and yes, what I'm going after here is I want to create a measure that shows me how many different restaurants I visited on a given day. So the goal is to count up the basically the rows or number of restaurants in my restaurant dimension, but have that filtered by the date table and sort of then flowing through the fact table to kind of join those up. That's kind of the goal. And I'll show the visual in the next slide, but so yeah, and because initially, like in the base data model, the relationship is filtering from the restaurant dimension to the fact table, you know, it's not going to be able to count this up filtering by date. You'll get the exact same number of restaurants every single day. Unless you do something like this measure here in the bottom. So restaurants visited, start again with calculate. For the expression, I'm doing a distinct count here on the restaurant ID. Could also count up restaurant name. This potentially also works if, for some dimensions you had to really, if it was a big one, especially if it was a type 2 dimension where you have multiple rows per entry, then you can count up business ID or something like that. And then CrossFilter takes 3 arguments. The first 2 are just the columns in an existing relationship again, so the restaurant ID and columns in both the dimension and the fact in this case. And then the third argument tells you what you want the filter direction, or what you want the filter to do. So in this case, I'm using both, which turns it into a bidirectional relationship, which allows the restaurant dimension table to be filtered by the fact, and by extension the date table. And yeah, so that's what's happening in this case. The other options are one way, so you can turn a bidirectional relationship into a one directional, or you could also put none in there, which turns off the relationship if that's what you want to do. And go back to visual. So this is the first visual I created, and I added a line onto it showing the number of restaurants I went to each day using this restaurants visited visual. And you can see it changes every day by the number of different restaurants. And yeah, so we're filtering by date, and then it's going through the fact table, and then it's counting it up based on the relationship there. Okay. And then the third one I wanted to show was just sort of a way to create a relationship between tables that do not have any existing relationships in the data model at all. Neither a active or inactive relationship. One thing, if you needed to, maybe I wanted to directly filter the date table or the restaurant table by my date table in this case, and I've added a date first visit date ID in my date dimension table here, so the first day I visited each restaurant, and I wanted to just filter that directly, so no care about which days I ended up going, just when did I go there first. And usually in a star schema, you're not going to put any relationships between dimension tables. You could do a inactive relationship. Power BI will let you get away with that, although but if you try to make it active, it'll usually throw up an error because you get some sort of the logic gets really confusing, and Power BI detects that. It's like, yeah, I can't deal with this. So but if you wanted to do it, one way to do it is in a measure and creating a virtual relationship. And one function to do that is the TreatAs function, which this just becomes basically a filter argument in calculate like before. I'll show that, but just to go through it first. So TreatAs takes 2 arguments. The first one is a source table, so it's effectively your dimension that you're filtering by. The argument here needs to take a table. And then the second argument are the column or columns to be filtered, so you could put multiple ones in here. So this source table could have multiple columns that you're putting in there, and then they need to map onto the columns that you're filtering though. So an example I'm using here, so the dim date ID, and using the values function to pull out that column and return it as a table. And then it's mapping onto the first visit date ID table or column I've added in the restaurant dimension. And yeah, so then, you can get a visual like this. So, on each day that I went to, new restaurants, at least it's counting up. So I start to calculate, and then I'm just counting up restaurant IDs and, counting up which ones I went to, just how many on each day, new ones I went. And then again, that's a direct relationship between there. And this also will respond to filters, so that if you had some other filter on or like a slicer filtering your date dimension, then it will respond to that and behave appropriately. We're doing on time. Okay, a bit on time. So I'm gonna go through I want to just do kind of a live demo, just kind of go through all of that again. Sometimes good. The slightly different data model. So I showed basically this picture before. So this is just part of the AdventureWorks database. AdventureWorks, if you don't know, is a fictitious company created by Microsoft, and they sell mountain bikes and things around that, accessories, and but it's a nice, you can look it up. It's a nice, good practice database. You can do lots of just practice with and playing around and upping your skills. As a portion of it, the reseller sales portion, so AdventureWorks makes the bikes and the accessories. They then sell them to independent bike shops and things like that, and those places actually sell the stuff. So these are those orders going to the various stores. It's for dimensions, I have the employee that did the sale. I have the reseller, so the store that's actually doing the sale to the customer. And the dates, and I'm linking the dates up on the order date key and the shipping date. So what I got up here right now is just a simple one showing the sales amount. So broken down by month, and then we have just a bar chart on just the total amount, like value of sales made every month. And let's just say I wanted to find out, okay, so every month, so these are the orders per month, and then when are they, or how much is actually getting shipped every month, and might be something else I'd be interested in. So make that measure there, and this will use the use relationship functionality. Summing up the sales amount. That's the most important part. Date. And so make that measure, and because in between here, so that's the order. I got relationships between the date and the reseller tables on order date, and the inactive relationship, the dotted one here, that's on the shipping date. And I made that. I can bring that in. Yeah, close it. Yeah, and so so now I've added that measure. So now I can see, see when sales are being made, and then how much is getting shipped every month. Something else I might be interested in would be the number of resellers that I'm selling to. And I'll go with a distinct count. So the goal here is I want to be able to count up the number of resellers selling to, so I'm going to do a distinct count on the reseller name column of the reseller dimension. And then I got a, and because that's a dimension, the direction of the filtering on that relationship is going to the fact table. So I got to change the direction of that relationship. So, and I'll do a both. There, I think that worked. And then I can bring that into line. And there we go. And then it shows, so some months no sales, but it shows number of resellers buying stuff every month, and it's going up. I guess it's a slight upward trend, which is nice. And just the last example I want to just do was I want to do analysis of employees being hired at AdventureWorks. So, and basically break it down by date that they were hired. And there's no relationship between the date dimension and the employee dimension in the model, so I'm going to have to use the TreatAs function values. And so basically I got to return a table here. In this case, there is no date ID column in the employee table. There is a date column of the date that the employee was hired. So that's what I need to filter on in this case. And employee hire date. Extra comma. And I got a visual going at the bottom here. I can just bring in that count. So it's breaking down by year. I put that in there already. And then the measure here, employees hired, that's counting up the number of employees that were hired every year. So we had a big year, 2008. Financial crisis worked out well. And yeah, so that's this was all kind of quick, but that's yeah, that was what I wanted. The bulk of I guess that's mostly what I wanted to share today. Hopefully you'll find some of that useful. I went over 3 functions: use relationship, CrossFilter, and TreatAs, which you can work with and adjust and play with your data models a little bit. Yeah, in case you missed anything or anything like that, I do have a blog post on the Iteration Insights website that goes through all of this, and so you can see it all there as well. There's a couple links here. I think I'm going to copy paste all of this, drop it in the chat. There's a couple websites here that have some useful information on these functions and additional articles if you're interested. Otherwise, yeah, I guess thanks for listening.